Going live now on YouTube. All right, let's see. Let me check my... There. Let's read. That's fine. That's decent. All right. Okay. You know what? Let's reload this.
There we go. I think that was it. Where are we at?
Ecclesiastes 12.
Okay. Oh, wow. You guys made a lot of progress. Well, you don't have a talker in the group.
I was trying to think of something smart I'd like to say, but I blanked out, I'm ashamed to say.
Self-burn.
Did you like my song I sent you, Brendan?
It's good. Oh, yes. Yes, I did. Now I remember.
Excuses?
So I'm pretty much mostly recovered from COVID. The only weird thing that's been happening, and I'm not sure if it's COVID related or not, like last night in class, I was following a train of thought and coming to the final point, and I just bloop, blanked. And I'm like,
there is such a thing as COVID fog.
yeah, but I heard that you know it if you have COVID fog. Like it's
Yeah, but I was going to say, are you blaming that on COVID?
Yeah, it's kind of unfair.
everyone else is blaming everything on COVID. So I mean,
That's a good point.
Sometimes after I had COVID, I sneeze and start speaking Portuguese. But
I mean, let's blame everything on COVID. You know, taxes too high, COVID. Not married
I'm
yet.
ugly because of COVID.
Yeah, poor Brian. Brian lost his hair because of COVID.
It was a terrible. It was all just in my way anyway.
It was pre-COVID, but it was COVID.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's right. It was pre-COVID. I had
you
pre-COVID
actually had it.
symptoms.
You actually had the pre-COVID genes.
Like 20 years before I got COVID, it was
Yeah,
pre-COVID.
it was just building up,
It was.
ready to start.
I wonder if I have it on my phone.
Now YouTube, the YouTube filter algorithm's going to grab us for making conspiracy comments about COVID.
So
Just don't say ivermectin. Oh, Phil, I said it.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah. Here's the 5 words we can't say in order to.
what was
And
that
they
one?
are.
Hydroxychloroquine or something?
Yeah,
like
that's
that?
the other one. Yeah.
Hey, that's the one I
essential
had.
oils,
What was that the Steltler fella said? Don't do the research yourself. There's one news where he was complaining about people doing their own research into this.
So Guillermo was out a couple weeks ago for a meeting, and I was well enough to attend the last night. So we took a photo together, and he made the joke, and I think he's right. Guillermo is pre-COVID. I am post-COVID. Before COVID, I was a handsome, dark Hispanic. I was muy guapo. After COVID,
Oh, you're the before and after of one person. I get it.
No mas.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No
All
mas.
right. Entiendo.
Okay.
There's so much, and you kind of saw this coming if you were just a little bit reasonable. There's so much correcting now.
Yeah.
I mean, in everything, even in the government world, political news that is coming out. I'm telling you, people don't let things go. And when they think they've been wrong, they're going to investigate it, and it's going to continue until everything's flushed out.
Yeah, John. You know what? I'm just wondering how many years it's going to be before we start seeing the law commercials. If you took this and this vaccine, contact us.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris Kramer there in the chat says that after COVID, he spoke with a British accent for a week. But he said it had nothing to do with COVID.
It was just his opportunity.
Yeah, just the opportunity.
Blame
yeah.
it on COVID. So
The only time an illness caused me to speak weird, we lived down in Lawton, and some of the men at the church and I met over at a Chinese restaurant. And I'd never messed with wasabi.
I don't like where this is going.
I've never messed with wasabi or ginger. And so one of my friends, Kevin Kelly, said, what you need to do is mix a little bit of the wasabi with ginger before you dip whatever raw stuff I was trying to eat. And so I got the proportions wrong and had more wasabi than ginger. And it was hot. and it caused an allergic reaction in my tongue. So this was Wednesday night when I thought clapped, I would teeth and clap like this because my tongue was kind of swollen. And come Sunday, it wasn't much better, but okay.
Let me know if you get a flop sweat and numb tongue. Numb tongue?
Numb tongue. That's it.
Do you guys remember do you guys remember the
John?
time that we were online all together and you all thought I had a stroke?
Yep.
Because I had Bell's palsy coming on, and my face was drooping. I couldn't say for several weeks, maybe a couple of months, P's or T's. And
right.
the only way I could do it while I was preaching is to hold my face up like this, and then that would tighten the muscle enough that I could pronounce them.
So were you like this? Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious?
No, I just hold it all one. Yeah.
Maybe like Moses, you needed somebody to come up and do it for you while you were talking. After a while.
Oh, I wish I would have thought of that. But
Hey, John. You talked about eating that raw fish with the wasabi. You know what you needed was a little bit of flour and grease and a frying pan, and then that fish might have been okay.
And
Daniel is
substitute
telling
tartar
us.
sauce for the wasabi.
Daniel's telling us that we're getting an echo.
I know why. Sorry, hang on.
I made the mistake. I like to, be doctor online, and I made the mistake of looking up Bell's palsy, and most people it fully goes away. 90% of people only have mild ongoing problems, but I just was sure I was the 10% that would be that way for the rest of my life.
Right.
I'm one of the ones who still has some issues. When I get really tired, I can feel it, and my speech will slur a little bit, and because of that. But I'm aware of it, so I can try to be very careful in pronouncing, and that's adequate. So,
John, you telling that wasabi story. Caleb Schatz had told me that when Andy Cantrell was holding a meeting someplace that, he let them know that he likes really spicy food. So one of the ladies in the Midwest never made salsa before, made salsa. Except she didn't know you only put like one jalapeno in it. She made the entire salsa out of jalapenos. And Andy
jalapeno salsa
ate the entire jar because he just loved it. He's like, what's in this stuff? He got gout on that meeting. He was bedridden the next day. Just could not speak at all. Man.
One of the first times growing up, we went to a Chinese restaurant. And my mother, I remember she saw the wasabi. She thought it was guacamole. And she says, I'm going to dip something in it, a wonton or something, and just dipped a big scoop of it and ate it. Sinus problems for a month.
Brian, your guys' new building's looking pretty good. I saw the
We're
photos.
really excited about it.
I know, right? There's a lot of light. That's good.
It's beautiful. Yes. After the first sermon, they'll probably want to close all that light off. And
why is it that most church buildings are so dimly lit and have no natural lighting? Come on.
They don't want people looking out the windows and get distracted by squirrels.
Well, is it the case that Jehovah's Witnesses intentionally do not put windows on their buildings? Somebody told me once, well, they don't want the light of the world coming in. But they don't, if you ever notice, they don't have windows on their buildings when they build a building.
I have noticed that.
I don't know if that's
Alexa, why do Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Halls not have windows?
From Babylonbee.com. Jehovah's Witnesses fear windows, which is why their chapels don't have
That's the Babylonian bee.
Yeah, Babylon Bee. Well,
that's a trustworthy news source.
Probably the only answer we
funny
get.
source, but
my Alexa did the same thing. It popped up when you said that.
Was that why
I
we
heard
had
it
two
on
of
the?
them? Okay.
Yeah.
Our most popular books are John or Psalm.
Alexa, stop talking.
Shut up.
Somebody was talking. Did you fix the echo?
So what causes the echo is I forgot to put my earpiece on. So my mic was picking up y'all talking through my speakers. And it's fine for me sitting here, but when we're live, it creates the echo. So now I'm back.
Right. Okay. Well, you know what? I got to thinking. They say if something is if something is good, it's worth repeating.
There you go.
I mean, kill two birds with one stone. Just to have it.
Why do you think?
Twice,
Why do you think they pronounce the blessings and cursings from Ebal and Gerizim?
Hey,
that way there's an echo. Dear people.
Did you see that recent story about the curse they found on Mount Ebal?
I did.
Oh, yeah,
boy,
Luke
that
Handler.
is
Luke Handler
exciting.
had done some writing on that. So
yeah,
it dates back to about what? About
the time of Moses. They think they 1300 BC. So
yeah,
I mean, potentially, you could be looking at the curse that they put down on the mountain because they put the curse on the mountain, and then they found this document.
There was also a piece of jar or something that they found with inscription writing on it. That very well could be from the time of Solomon, but the language on it is from where the Queen of Shebaean, whatever it was. And so they're saying it could be the proof of link between Solomon and the Queen of Sheba because of where it was found and everything. Yeah, it's some reason.
It's so interesting to me that, not saying us, but many people are shocked at that. It's like that area of the world was more civilized. I mean, they were doing international trade before Rome was even a republic. I mean, the ancient kingdom of Aksum, which is where probably the Queen of Sheba was ruling, that's where all the Western world's gold was coming from. So, yeah. There's a lot of factual misnomers that have continued to persist to this day, like the ancient world was illiterate. No, it wasn't.
Right. And the more we look at garbage cans of people from the past, the more we'll learn. That's where they get it from. Garbage heaps and stuff like that. That's why we do receipts now on paper, so they don't survive and prove the stupid stuff we bought.
I know, like some of the earliest writing is, it's a contract dispute. Of course, we could bring in Stargate on this and throw the whole wrench in the system, but
but we're here for wisdom, not sci-fi. So it's all righty. Well, we're going to start here in just a moment. We're picking up in Ecclesiastes 12. We've got several who have joined us already. We'll talk more about it once we get started and everything. But if you want to chime in, let us know where you're from. That'd be perfectly fine. We'd love to hear from you. So. All right, I'm getting ready to fade to black, and then we will be right back. Let's see. Greetings, I'm John Duvall. Welcome back to another Truth Factor discussion. We'd like to thank you for taking your time to join us as we study through the Word of God, trying to factor the truth of God's Word into our life and hopefully your life as well. One of the reasons why we kind of meet like this is for our own individual benefits as we study together with one another. But we like to open it up to others who want to join us via the live stream. And hopefully you'll find it beneficial. I know that we do for our own personal studies, and we're pleased and thankful that you've joined us this morning. If you've joined us through our Facebook page, the live stream there, then you can drop comments on this live stream, and we will be brought into our study. Bring in your thoughts, your questions, maybe comments that you have over what we're talking about. If you're watching this on our YouTube live stream, then use the chat area there on our YouTube channel, and we'll bring in your thoughts and questions and comments that way too. Also, let me bring this up. If you wanted to contact us, there we go. You can contact us individually there at the email address that's seen on the screen, first name @truthfactor.com. Tom is a little bit different because he's a serial simple TOM. But you can also write us at questions@truthfactorlive.com. Do that as well. All right, so let me get back to the full gallery mode. What do I got to do? Remove pin. Got to find a shortcut for that, make it a little bit quicker. Let's see, we have Michael Davis with us. Gregor is with us. Danielle and Truth and Reason and others. Want to thank you so much for joining us. And if you're watching us and you don't want to be known who you are, don't want us to know, that's fine too. But if you want to say hi, just drop the word hi and we'll see who you are, where you live, phone number, social security number, all that other stuff will come our way. Not really. All righty, gentlemen. So we're looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 12 this morning. And in the first section of this, I would guess down to verse 8, it kind of basically what Solomon is saying, kind of put it in a nutshell, it's difficult getting old. And you got to realize that when you're young, that one day you're going to get old, and once you get old, you can't get young again. And so there's some wisdom there behind that. So let's go ahead and read it. And Brandon, let's break this up just a little bit. Go ahead and read for us, if you would, the first 4 verses, and then we will go forward from there.
Sure. Ecclesiastes 12, 1 through 4 from the Legacy Standard Version of the Bible. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days happen and the years draw near in which you will say, I have no delight in them. Before the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain. In the day that the watchmen of the house tremble, and valiant men bend down, the grinding ones stand idle because they are few, and those who look through the windows grow dark. And the doors on the street are shut as the sound of the grinding mill is low. And the one will rise at the sound of the bird, and all the daughters of song will sing softly.
Okay. All right, let's take, let's go ahead and read the rest of it, Brian, if you would, 5 through 8 now.
Also, they are afraid of height and of terrors in the way when the almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper is a burden, and desire fails. For man goes to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. Remember your Creator before the silver cord is loosed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the well. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it.
All right. Okay. So with that being the case, then let's see. Brandon, you read from the Legacy Standard Version, didn't you?
Yep.
Okay, that's what I thought. So looking at this, notice with us there in verse number 1, as we give consideration to this. Let me get back to, bear with me a second there. Interesting. Go to that. So the writer here encourages, admonishes the reader, maybe his sons, maybe the younger people within his family. If we were to think about Solomon maybe writing it for his sons, not really sure about that. What is the significance, Brendan, of his phrase, remember now your Creator in the days of your youth? What's he building up to, do you think, as the main point within his admonition here?
Well, we're rapidly approaching the summation of the book at the end of this chapter of the fear God and keep his commandments. But going back to your question in verse 1, a lot of people think they'll have time later. Mm-hmm. I'll have time later to build a stronger marriage. I'll have time later to get serious about my career. I'll have time later to do XYZ thing. And it used to be, I'll have time later to serve God. Problem is, a couple of them, you may not have time later. That's just the reality of it. Secondly, life has a certain momentum built into it, kind of like a snowball going down a hill. And later, your heart may be so hardened that you have no desire whatsoever to serve God. You may not care to develop a career or strengthen a marriage later, because in your youth, that's the time to build those lifelong habits and set your house in order, as it were. It's a lot harder to change when you got, say, 40, 50, 60 years of momentum working against you. However, it's a lot easier to maintain on a good path if you have those same 40, 50, 60 years of momentum working with you. So when is the time to get your life right with God? When is the time to start serving him? When is the time to get your house in order? It's when you're young. And I just saw a headline the other day that some psychologists are rightfully getting concerned that adolescence and childhood is the time we're spending in that is growing longer and longer now. That we're not taking on the responsibility of living and being functional adults and participating in society. Whereas our ancestors, this whole idea of childhood, it's relatively new. You know, taking secular Judaism, you know, for a vast majority of their history, once a boy turned 13, they were considered a man, which means they were given responsibility. They were expected to be functioning members of society. You know, not going to be CEO, but okay, you're old enough to participate in synagogue. You're old enough to start working. You're old enough to have responsibility. And really, I make an application today that shows called Truth Factor. I wonder if sometimes we do this in the church with our young people, that we really don't give them enough thought or responsibility because we're like, well, they're still in their teens. They don't know any better. They're not capable. They don't have wisdom. Okay, there might be some truth to that, maybe. But also, you can't really develop wisdom or responsibility unless you're given the opportunity to do that. You know, for our young people, if they're baptized, if they are Christians, why not give them responsibility? Why not hold them accountable? Why not have them be participants in the community, so that down the road we're not losing our young people because, well, I'm not being of value. They don't think I can do anything, so I may as well just drop out or go someplace else. So probably a long answer to a short question, but those are my thoughts.
Well, I think it's a very good point. When you hear, well, I guess in Brendan's case it'd be his grandparents talking, but when you hear about generations past, you would hear about people taking on more responsibilities when they were in their teenage years. And we think, well, we've got it so much better. They can stay a kid longer. But that's a valid point. They're not learning to be responsible and the level of responsibilities as they should be. And so they come in it kind of late and stunted, and we kind of see the lack, I can't think of the term I'm looking for. What do they call it when the development is hindered?
Failure to thrive?
Stunted. Their development is stunted. When we planted our garden, and Ron had planted some beans and stuff, and we went out there and we looked at a bean that was breaking through the ground and everything. And something I really had not heard, she says, they say you're not supposed to help that bean out. I said, what do you mean? So if people want to reach down and move the dirt away, they say the bean will be stronger if it pushes through the dirt itself and comes out than if you reach down and make it easy for it. Now, I would think that's kind of silly, but actually that's life's lesson. And our youth should be spent learning about serving the Lord and being as zealous as possible. Not just in your teens, but in your 20s and your 30s, because at some point it's going to be so much harder to be active the way that you would like.
Well, and to that point, not jumping ahead or anything, but the next couple verses I think are just poetic ways of referring to old age. I mean, he says, before the evil days come where the sound of a bird will wake you up. That's my dad. The old house we used to live in, he'd had nearly blackout curtains in his bedroom, and we had this little cottage. If somebody went out there and turned the light on and they turned off, that little light would hit right at the crack of the curtain and come right in and wake him up. You just get to that age where every little thing in the night affects you, and I think it speaks to the whole momentum thing.
Yeah.
Serve God now, build that foundation so when you're old, you can still be serving him. I read an Asian proverb the other day that in your youth, serve by actions, um, in your middle age, serve by words, and then after your old age, teach by words, and when you're long gone, teach by virtue because you lived a virtuous life. And I think there's some truth in that. When you're young, Paul told Timothy, be an example. Elders are commanded to teach. And then those who have passed on, the Hebrew writer says they form the great cloud of witnesses that surround us. And so, I want to be living a life that when I'm gone, I can still be teaching. I can be like Abel, as the Hebrew writer points out. Now's the time. I think the elders where I grew up at, because at 17, they said, here's the new converts class material. You're going to go teach it. And I wasn't told how to teach. An elder sat in the class with me, but I had the freedom to explore that and figure out how to teach. And I can guarantee those classes weren't the most in-depth. But it set me on a trajectory where the expectation was, you're old enough, you're a Christian, have the responsibility. Because like that bean illustration, we're not doing anyone any favors if we spoon feed them.
It's like a kid learning how to walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Brendan, you took this discussion in the direction of, from the standpoint of learning while you're young and so on, and that's definitely the point. But you mentioned there toward the end the idea of the physical aspect of it, and I very much think that that's what he's dealing with through verse 8. I think he's actually getting into descriptions of how the body wears out. Maybe even describing death itself in verses 6 and 7 and so on. But another thought that goes along with this, you remember God now because when you get older, there's going to be more obstacles. Not only physical, not only from your physical body, but just from the decisions that you've made. Think of financial decisions. Think of health decisions, and of course you've got the spiritual aspects yourself. But the point is life's not going to get easier as you get older. The New King James uses the word difficult. Your version used the word evil, and it's the idea of when you say the evilness of life, the things that are frustrating and bad in life, and that's going to happen. I remember when I was young, I used to sit there and think to myself, I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm going to eat whatever I want, yada, yada, yada. So what if it cuts a couple of years off my life on the end? Of course, you're in your teens or your early 20s, and what's the difference between living 71 years and living 73 years or something like that? But I'm going to tell you right now, that is a regretted statement, because it's not just about cutting a couple of years off your life. It's about the 20 or 30 years leading up to that, where the quality of your life is less because you didn't take care of yourself when you were younger. Whether you're dealing with, the finances, and I think that that's a relevant aspect today. Try to learn while you're young. Try to learn to manage your life and live within your means while you're young, and don't accumulate the debt that's going to literally be it's going to be a taskmaster, when you get older, and not just a taskmaster. It's going to be a burden from the standpoint of when you realize, I'm getting older and older. I'm not going to be able to keep going, and I'm not ready. I'm not ready to have to stop. I'm not going to be able to retire, or you go with those kinds of things. So you've got those physical aspect, but just everything wears down, and your body does. Your body, I want to say it quits working, but that's not true. It just works less well than it used to.
Reminds me of those videos where you see someone driving a car down the highway and one of the wheels falls off or goes flat, and then he keeps going, and finally another one goes out. That's how when we get older. Yeah.
Exactly.
Good point,
Exactly.
Tom. Yeah, yeah. So let's go ahead and take a minute and bring up some comments here real quick. The first one, I think we're going to start with Mr. Mike. There we go. So Mike says, having reached the 70 mark, I rejoice in that, quote, I remember my Creator in the days of my youth. Now, I can appreciate those years, having now a stronger foundation upon which to stand in my old age. The physical is much harder, as Solomon shows, but the spiritual is secured in the mind, soul, heart, that helps me press onward to the fulfillment of Ecclesiastes 12:13 through 14. That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah. Any thoughts about that before we move on to the next two comments? All right, Brian, do you have a truth and reason handy?
I do. I see the comment about his 15-year-old grandson, correct?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
My 15-year-old grandson told me yesterday he was looking forward to getting a job. I was so proud. So I've got that.
Okay, and let me get rid of my big old face here. There we go.
And then after that, I see Gregor Hinckley
Yeah.
says it's saying it's my story too. As a young person at about 25, I'd be a prodigal son. I looked for work in the church and kept getting shunned. I did it wrong. I also had no guidance. Gratefully, I came home.
That's a good point. Yeah. I think far too often, if we're not careful, we get ourselves into a situation where we become discouragements to the youth and not encouragements to them.
Yeah.
But then there's the other side of the coin, and this is where we have to be careful, because I am this way. You're worried, will they be reliable enough to fulfill the task? Well, I can just do it myself, and it'll be done right. And many times it's the sheer effort that you let them do when they're young, even if they mess up. And people are going to be back there maybe judging them a little bit. Others will be praising them a little bit. But you have to let them push through it and learn how to do it. And
You think, John, sometimes we struggle in the church with an attitude that says, that the assembly, the teaching, the preaching has to be perfect, and therefore we don't allow people to step in that don't have the developed skills to do it. I've heard sometimes somebody says, well, yeah, let's put our best song leaders out front, which of course, makes for a more dynamic time of worship, but it also fails to bring in those people that need to prepare those skills and get those skills going. Or, I don't want this guy to come in and preach because sometimes he says things that aren't quite accurate. Well, and I've always kind of said, well, that's to be expected when you're learning what's truth and you're trying to do these things. You're going to get up and you're going to say some foolish things time to time.
Yeah.
And so there's a balance between you're trying to have that, 1 Corinthians 14, doing everything decently and in order, but at the same time trying to propel people to grow into roles because the preacher's not always going to be there. Those old men, diligent old men, are going to die, and you need new men to take their place, and they're not going to learn how to do that without some opportunity.
Well, yeah. Paul, he does clarify his statement from 1 Corinthians 14, let things be done decently in order, or 1 Corinthians
14.
That's
14.
right. I'm sorry. I'm looking at 2 Corinthians. I thought there's not 14 chapters. Where did I go wrong? Sorry.
14,
so his
14
statement in 1
Corinthians
Corinthians,
is the passage.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Well, he explains that in chapter 17 of 1 Corinthians by saying that in your worship, you've got to put forth your best song leader and the best prayer leader and the best preacher and the best teachers. So for chapter 17, look it up, 1 Corinthians 17. That's the passage that says our worship service has to be perfect externally. Right?
I believe that's the one that mentions, that mentions me by name, I think, in that chapter.
Yeah. And preachers have to wear suits.
That's right. That's
Suits and
right. Wear
ties.
your best to church. That's what it says there in chapter 7.
Yeah,
We're jesting, of course, but
yeah, right. And you know, when you actually think about that from that standpoint, if you've got a congregation that has that attitude, and like I said, I don't agree with that attitude, but here's the other question: what resources are you providing to develop those young ones? In other words, I mean, you've got the idea of what about if you at least have training classes?
Yeah.
You know, do you have training classes to teach them to lead singing and to get up and give a small talk, to lead a prayer and understand what the difference between a prayer for the Lord's Supper and an opening prayer and a closing prayer are? You know, do we take the time to train them? And incidentally, the answer then it's still a two-pronged process. I mean, after you train them, you still got to put them in there, and they've got to get that hands-on experience, and that's still a part of the learning process. So,
and the other side of this, that's a double-edged sword, is you can provide the training, you can provide the input, the guidance, all that stuff to set people up for success. And this is going to be a Brendan opinion here, so but individuals who do not show the desire to take advantage of that and yet still expect the privilege, and it is a privilege, to serve, there's a disconnect there. There really is. I've seen some members who they've admit, I cannot carry a tune. I am tone deaf, but they're there for song leader training because this is important. You know, I want to at least know how to do it or something, even though I don't think I have the skill set. There's a heart component to all this. And there's some young people who take advantage of every opportunity and want to serve, and they're not given the opportunities. And that's a shame. That really is a shame. Then there's the flip side of that, where we have, you might have older Christians who think it's their right that they get to serve. And no, it's not. To serve God is a privilege. It's a privilege that you earn by your good conduct and your desire to want to serve the Lord. Congregation and the Lord doesn't owe anyone anything. But we're getting out of the weeds here. But back to the original thing is, if you are a young person, express your desire to serve if you want to serve. And as a congregation or leadership, we should be willing to, we need to be embracing that kind of attitude and provide the skills, the opportunities, and the tool set and the training to make sure that we're setting people up for success. Yeah. Because giving people the opportunity to preach or to teach or to song lead, and they do something wrong, and we never tell them or instruct them or help them improve, that's on us, and we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's a lot more we could say. I do want to clarify something. Okay, what I was kind of poking at with what Brian was saying is there is a mentality where we do put, in my opinion, more emphasis on the appearance of things within worship, where it matters how good the song leader is. It matters how good the Bible class teacher is, and those are not of any biblical consideration. Now, individually, there's a reasonable argument to say that when we come together to worship the Lord, we should bring our best attitude, our best spirit. Does it mean we have to wear our best clothing? That's very culturally, okay? I don't know if Paul had a special outfit he wore on the first day of the week when they assembled together. I figure he probably washed his clothes. I mean, they did that once in, 2 weeks or so. They'd wash clothes or something. But we lose focus on what's most important sometimes if we're not careful. On the comments about the training thing, I want to say amen, absolutely. Sadly, that's not been my strong suit, and it's something that I really need to address within myself about having classes to get the young men prepared, I'm going to sit here and say amen and make it think that I've done great things on that, because I haven't,
Yeah, John, you got some comments that...
Oh, yeah, let's continue with that. We talked about Gregor's story arc. Let's jump to Michael's real quick, and then we'll bring in Danielle's. Let's see. Bring this up. So Michael says Titus 2 commands the elderly ones teach the younger ones. If that is not done, then the church suffers because the younger ones are not taught. It isn't the public perfection we seek, but spiritual perfection. It's called growth. Excellent point. Very wise point with that. Tom, do you want to read Danielle's comments?
Sure. Yeah. Danelle made the comment. A very good comment, Tom. Do we need to go on? No. No. Sorry. Very good comment, Tom. We had men's training class through the years, and there isn't a man in our congregation that won't get up and fill in to teach or preach when there is a need. And that's a truth. And one thing about where Danelle attends, her father is Galen Evans, and he's still preaching there. It's like us. It's a small congregation, and you depend on everyone to be able to step up and be able to step in. I know that her dad has had some very, very serious health issues injuries that resulted in him for months not being able to go to services and so on. He had operations and everything, and the congregation there, obviously they didn't miss a beat, as far as having individuals that were ready to step in and present lessons and do everything that needed to be done. And we need to do that training, and that goes along with the point that Mike is making there, and the observation we've made. What are we setting up for the next generation? We express our concerns about the direction that the next generation is going, and I have serious concerns in many ways. But at the same time, what have we done to help them so that won't happen?
Yeah, good point. Paul, let me throw this at you just for a moment.
Yes, sir.
So there in verse number 6, let me bring this back up for everybody. So he begins by saying, remember your creator before the silver cord is loose. So you'll notice that's in italics, remember your creator. What is this a continuation of in verse 6? Just to kind of help us to pull the conclusion to this section.
Well, you connect, just to be real obvious about it, you connect two words, remember and before, and so don't wait until it's too late, because there is a time that it's too late. I'd kind of been thinking, I was thoughtfully listening, but I was kind of thinking about this, and I think that the idea is to be able to face your old age without a regret of the things that you can't do, because there probably will come days in which you are physically limited and you say, oh, I want to go out and do this for the Lord. And you're probably, if you're blessed to live a lot of years, you're probably going to reach a point that you want to, but you're just not physically able to. And so live your life without regrets. And before the silver cord is snapped, I think Brian mentioned earlier, the golden bowl is broken, or maybe that was Tom, and mentioning there, maybe there's a picture of death or near death, what life is like when things are really critical. You notice I dropped offline a moment ago. The reason is because I got a call. We had a member pass away yesterday, and his wife was calling about the funeral. And he was a hard worker for a lot of years, but as he got older, and especially in these past couple of months, there was not much that he could do. He was physically incapacitated, and so I like the idea of being able to say, well, no, there are lots of things I can do. We shouldn't live in self-pity and think that there's nothing we can do. I appreciate what Brendan said about that. About there is purpose in life for the elderly, and many things that they can do. We say, well, but I can't do that anymore. But I can live my life knowing that, well, when I was in those younger years, I did those things. And so that's just kind of my thoughts on this section.
Paul, let me ask you this real quick. Do you think sometimes that maybe we set the bar unintentionally too high in public service that it becomes a discouragement to others?
I actually had said something about that, and I appreciate you
I
finding
know
it
that's why I
worthy
brought
to,
it up.
yeah, finding it worthy to bring up. Um, when congregations are intolerant of the weak, and by that I don't mean they're not helping them grow or they just put up with it. I don't mean that. But when we look at those who maybe can't serve as well publicly, or they're going to struggle if they make a comment, or and we beat them down, well, then you end up with a congregation of really strong people. All five of them are really strong, but all those people that were weak through the years have been driven away. And I do think that we sometimes set our spiritual bars so high that uh, while we don't believe in survival of the fittest, like Darwin said, spiritually we treat people that way, and we need to instead nurture growth and be patient and loving and kind with those who are weak, and maybe those who don't grow real fast. I'm you so we have a new yard, and I'm trying to grow a few things, and I'm out there looking every day. Have the flowers come up yet? The seeds that I planted, are they up yet? And I'm impatient. I want them to grow right away. But with a young soul or an immature soul, maybe not physically young, we need to be patient and nurturing. And if we say, well, you ought to know better than that, or you shouldn't have said that, or you need to just quit serving until you can do better than that, they're going to go away. We're not going to get them back, and we're going to have maybe a congregation of really strong people. But I think the picture of a growing, healthy congregation is that you have a strong core, but you also have people who are weak, who are in the process of growing, and you may even have some who are in their spiritual infancy, and they are growing and maturing and all of that. So I've kind of rambled on, and I'll
Well,
let you.
there was a case years ago of a young man who it was singing night, from what I understand, and was trying to have the congregation sing Hallelujah. Okay, and Hallelujah has the descant that the sopranos sing. All right. So he was in the process of trying to explain to the congregation, because it was kind of newer. I mean, it's in the book, but they hadn't really sung it much from what I understand. And he's trying to explain it. This was a teenager now, late teens. And one of the elders kind of roughly spoke up saying, just sing it as it's written. And kind of embarrassed the fella. Now, there may have been other things to affect him through the years, and his faithfulness waned after that. But that could have been the launching point, an intolerance in that situation to what he was trying to do. Wasn't wrong, wasn't unscriptural, but it was new. And sometimes we don't think before we do something, like as you were describing there, Paul. So
I think we need to be very, very patient of the young spiritually, and that might be a person who's converted when they're 60 or 70, and they're still young spiritually. Be very patient with the young spiritually. There are some things we are not to be patient with. Reject a divisive man after a first and second admonition. These kind of nasty negative attitudes that poison a congregation, they are to be dealt with, if I can use the word, harshly and immediately. But with someone who's just growing and doing good things and trying to do things they've not done in the past, we see a real value there. But again, I have, after being quiet for a long time, and I said listening, I'll go back to listening.
Well, and to illustrate your point, Paul, I knew of a man that he had served as an elder at one point, and younger man spiritually. It was his first time leading public prayer, and he was pretty nervous because it's Sunday morning. So without telling anyone else, without making a big scene of it, this older man just walks up with him to the front of the auditorium and just says, my hand will be on your shoulder. You say the prayer, and if you can't finish it, you get too nervous, you just tap my leg and I'll take over. Didn't offer any explanation, didn't make a scene of it. He says, I'm here. and I can take over. And the man didn't need him to take over, and he was fine after that. But the first time you get up in a congregation, it is intimidating because people's number one fear in this country, they fear more than death, and that is public speaking. And so it's a challenge, and we need to be patient, and we need to be encouraging, and we need to offer that encouragement. I've often said, don't just think to yourself, oh, that was a good prayer, he gave a good effort. Tell the person.
Yeah.
Be specific. Don't just say, oh, that was a good prayer. I mean, you can say it, but it's like, I really like how you address God in that, or I like how you petition God for brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so. Be specific with your encouragement.
Good point. Okay, let's go ahead and come back into this real quick on verses 6 and 7, where he talks about remember. So verse 1, he begins the whole section, remember your Creator. And so he's kind of, now let's the way the translators have brought this back in, they brought that reminder statement there, remember your Creator before death, basically. Tom, you had a quick thought about that, didn't you?
Yeah, well, yeah. Verses 2 through 5 describe the body wearing down. But I remember hearing one time somebody describe, and I've put this in a sermon, verse 6 seems to describe the process of death. He mentions the four things there. Remember your Creator before the silver cord is loosed. Think of it from the standpoint of the spinal cord. When one dies, the spinal cord relaxes, and as a result of that, the rest of the system the body goes limp. I mean, you think of a head. When somebody dies, if they're sitting up or whatever, their head all of a sudden slumps down, and you've got that idea of the golden bowl. If that's the skull or the head, it's broken. It just quits working. The pitcher being shattered at the fountain. Think of the heart, which distributes blood, nutrition, and life throughout the body. The idea of the wheel well, or the wheel broken at the well or the cistern. You've got the idea of every other system in our body, that they work together and they distribute everything that we need so that the body functions, whether you're talking digestive or, all the systems together. So Solomon here could be describing, remember God now before all of a sudden one day everything stops. It all breaks, and it is physically it's done. And so I kind of see that in that, and then you tie that into verse 7. You bury him, the dust returns to the earth as it was, and of course the spirit returns to God to face eternity.
That's a good point. I hadn't looked at it that way. That's a good point, though. I'm assuming the wheel at the well is the wheel that you turn to lower the bucket down. Is that what it means?
Yeah, to me that kind of makes sense as you look at it that way. But of course you got the idea of it's controlling everything.
Yeah.
It's controlling the ability of the well to be useful.
Yeah.
So, anyways, it's a thought, a theory.
Yeah. Interesting. All right, let's see. Let's bring in another comment, and then we'll see if there's anything else we want to say about 7 and 8, and then we'll size up the remainder of our time. Let's see. Truth and Reason sends us the following comment here. Well, that's Danielle's. Bringing Truth and Reason. There we go. When I was young, I was told by a teenage girl that I sang too loud. I clammed up for years. I got my confidence back, and a few years ago, a brother told me the same thing. This time I said, I know. And that's not an uncommon. People are very vocal with their criticisms at times. And maybe they don't think they're intentionally trying to criticize you, but lack of patience can be very hurtful.
And
Brendan.
to that point, I will say this. Song leading has a disproportionate effect on the service. And so because of that, song leaders get scared the most. I've been told the same thing. Now, I was told by the AV guys because they said, hey, we like it. We don't have to turn the microphones up real loud. But yeah, I mean, it's you can really do a lot of damage by a flippant remark. And
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to say this, but Philippians 4:8 people, you know, is it edifying? Is it pure? Is it lovely? Does it actually, was there something that this person absolutely need to know, that they absolutely need to know, that is that something they can control? But some people, they can't control the volume of their voice. And honestly, I'd rather have a song leader be a little bit too loud than I can't hear him. So.
And we're spoiled nowadays with the audio technology we've had now for, I don't know, 70, 80 years. You know, before it was all natural voice and places built to kind of amplify it. But, all right. Brian, any thoughts? You've just sat there quietly too for a bit.
Really, I've actually just my mind's been going like this. I've been thinking about all the different things we've been talking about here, and kind of thinking of some of my own experiences. I think some of the most practical and important things we've said are kind of revolve around this idea of how we criticize others, and the very definite care we need to take in doing so, so that we're not discouraging. This contrast in age, you know, and why it's so valuable to pursue godliness the younger you are. Just last night in one of our classes, we were talking about Joseph, and we were saying at 17 years old, he seems to already be a person pursuing godliness. You see a lot of that in the Bible. Teenagers, Josiah, Daniel, lots of guys that are just really young and turn to God, and that the results of that are a life without a lot of regrets. And in fact, one of the things I was doing was I was listening to you guys and writing this out. I was thinking, oh, this would be a good sermon to kind of say, you know, Ecclesiastes wants you to age, to reach old age with grace, and the idea of not being bitter and not being a complainer and not being a fault finder and not being somebody who's jealous. And I think a lot of times there's a jealousy that we have that somebody else can do things I used to be able to do and I'm no longer able to do. And that, you know, part of this idea of remembering your creator is the idea of saying, you know, what's the end of this matter? You know, sometimes this is crazy, but sometimes people reach the end of the race and they're so caught up in what they've lost that they become embittered and they actually don't finish the race faithful. I mean, it's crazy to me, because you think, hey, if you're at the end, this is when you stick it out. But I've seen several people that getting to the end, they're bitter, they're unhappy, they're resentful to God, to Christians, and they just kind of turn their back on it all. And it's unbelievable that you would run the whole race and at the end quit, but people do. And I have to believe that there's a little bit of what the writer here is saying of, you know what, you know, you get to the end, that last leg of the race is the hardest. That last leg of the race is going to be the toughest. But if you're committed to doing it, you'll finish it. You'll do it. But it's the one where your muscles cramp the most, you could say. It's the one where you start, you know, you really get hurt the worst. One of the things I was thinking of in some of this language in verse 5, afraid of height and terrors. And when I was a young man, just a teenager, one of the older men at church, who at the time was in his 70s or 80s, we were in the foyer talking, a bunch of little boys ran by. And he looked and he made a comment to me. He says, you have no idea that when you get to my age, what just happened, those kids running by, is one of the scariest things you have. Because I know if they bump me, I'll break my hip, I'll fall down. And I remember thinking at the time, you know, it had no impact on me. I didn't even think about it. And he says, that's terrifying, because it's just right there, the ability to be injured so easily. And it really stuck in my mind that, you know, that's what age is about. It's about things that you're now afraid of that you were never afraid of. Breaking your hip, number one on that list for a lot of people, you know, falling over, tripping and falling, the thing that we did half of our life without grace and didn't worry about it, now becomes one of our greatest fears. And that really is a profound thing to see.
That's a good point. Very good point. All right, let's see. I appreciate that. Okay, so what do you think? We've got 9 through 14? Let's go ahead and read through this. I know we're only about 6 minutes away from the end of the hour, or at least from the top of the hour. real quick, I'll bring in two comments, and then let's go ahead and read the rest of the chapter, because it's not enough to try to hold over to next week. Do you think? Yeah. So bringing in the comments here real quick, and this is a very good point, truth and reason. This follows up our discussion about song leaders. Song leaders need to lead, not be led. And that's a valid point. If you're going to stand up there and lead the congregation, you need to be able to lead the congregation. Now, we can start a whole conversation about, do we really need to have a song leader? Could someone start the song and sit down? Rhonda said years ago, I think it was Rhonda, there was a congregation where a song leader would do that. They'd stand up, start the song, sit down, and sing with everybody. But that's a whole nother discussion in and of itself. But if that's the role you're going to be, then you need to be leading the congregation that role.
Hey, John, real quick, I know you got one more comment. There are some other things that we could develop with this if we want to take it another week because of the importance of the verse. One of the things that I'm thinking about, I know I preached on this 2 years ago, and you asked the question, what if I am older? What can I do?
Yeah. Is this one of those one verses took 2 years to cover? Or are you just talking about you covered it 2 years ago?
Yeah.
We pick on Tom.
I'm about to finish it up. No. You know what? I'm looking at my outline from this. I preached on Ecclesiastes. It was May 9th, 2021. So almost 2 years to the week.
Wow.
I was finishing up this study, and I still had 2 lessons after this on Ecclesiastes. So
okay. All right. Well,
that's just a suggestion as opposed to.
Yeah. Well, we could also put that into its own separate topical study too.
Yeah.
If we wanted to, expand into that. Yeah. Gregor makes a valid point too. So our discussion works both ways in regards to people being critical. And it's harder on young people to receive criticism. When we were younger, criticism to a young married woman was very hard for her to take. Now you got an aged married woman, got 30 whatever years underneath the belt. That's your opinion, and go on. But Gregor says as individuals, we need to know more. We need to be more robust in taking criticism, as well as those that offer it need to be in a loving manner. My falling away was my personal issue. And that's right. Gregor wasn't blaming someone for his departure, but it did attribute it. It was kind of a launching point. And it's a two-way accountability there. Yeah. It's a good point. Yeah. Okay. And there's a lot more we could talk about that. I think, let me verify something. I may have mentioned this last week, and my brain's not recalling it. Talking about getting older. I had made some changes last week to how Zoom worked to make it easier for me to switch back and forth. This morning I forgot all that, thinking, why aren't these shortcuts working? Yeah. So that's all the piece of paper I wrote it down on. I think we have slated to do a topical study. 5 tips for growing a local church is what I have set to follow this study. So maybe that's something that we could bring what Tom's talking about into as a discussion there. Pulling some things, what can people do, even older people do. So, plan to do that then?
Mm-hmm.
So let's go ahead and read then the rest of this. Who's not read yet? I think Tom. Paul, you didn't read either, did you? Okay. So let's go ahead and kind of break it up real simple. Start with Tom there. And let's go ahead and read verses 9, 10, and 11. Actually, read down through 12. And then we'll have Paul finish up the chapter there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And it reads, and moreover, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yes, he pondered and sought out and set in order many proverbs. The preacher sought to find acceptable words, and what was written was upright, words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and the words of scholars are like well-driven nails given by one shepherd. And further, my son, be admonished by these. Making many books there is no end, and of study, and much study is wearisome to the flesh.
All right, Paul.
The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil.
Paul, what translation was that?
ESV.
Okay, all right, makes sense. Okay. All right, so let's see. So a couple of things here, just real quick, and it's interesting the development there in verse 9 about him pondering and seeking out, setting in order many proverbs, but especially the building up process. The words of the wise are like goads, and the words of scholars are like well-driven nails given by one shepherd. What are your thoughts on that? That's an interesting phrase there. Brendan.
Mm-hmm. Truth, no matter the medium by which it comes from, all comes from the same God and Creator. One of my nitpicky things is I don't particularly like the phrase God's truth. Because to me, it distinguishes that there's other truth. No, all truth, if it corresponds to reality, it's God's truth. God is the author of all truth. And so if I get value from this book or this commentary or this Bible class or this discussion, and it corresponds to the wisdom of God's word, yeah, I can use that to build my life with, because it comes from the same shepherd who has given all wisdom and knowledge, who has given all truth.
And you know, the idea of a well-driven nail, it's a nail that is placed where it's supposed to be, and it's secured in such a way that it's going to do its job for as long as it can.
Okay. It's a good explanation. Yeah. Good explanation there. My son, be admonished by these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is wearisome to the flesh.
It's an interesting one. That's an interesting one. I mean, you're never going to learn it all. And that's a powerful point to make in that particular statement there. Yeah. You're never going to learn everything.
And it's what I would like to call a preacher's proverb.
Yeah,
exactly. You can just, and anyone, too much of a good thing can be bad.
Exactly.
The Bible's great. Preaching's great. Teaching the lost is great, except when we are neglecting other important things that God has given us. Homer Haley used to tell every young preacher that he came across in his later years, and I've gotten it secondhand from those preachers, don't get so busy saving the world or studying that you lose your own family. Brother Halbrick had told Phil Martin one time that says, don't worry about meetings when you're young. Spend the time with your family. That will come in due time. Spend the time on the important stuff. And just throwing this out here, because I've had to learn this lesson the hard way. Preaching's very sedentary, and weariness to the bones. You're going to cut short your service to the Lord if you're not taking care of your physical health. We're not here forever, but we want to be as much good use to the Lord as possible. And if we're cut short because of health problems, preventable ones, that's on us. And I don't want to cut short my service to God because of things that kind of go into an early comment Tom made. Yeah. Because I made poor choices and sowed bad habits in my youth. And so now I'm reaping ill health effects in my later years. So
I think any future people who join us at Truth Factor, the new rule needs to be not under 40. Anyone not under 40 can't join us and give us lectures about being healthy and taking care of ourselves. But
yeah, we'll have a committee meeting when we get done with this one.
Yeah.
So
you're not wrong though, because it does creep up on you really, really fast. And if you choose to sit in your chair, and now if you go back 40 years, sitting in the preacher's chair, quote unquote, meant maybe you had more books open and you actually were being more studious. But nowadays, if you sit in your chair in front of your computer, there's so many distractions. It's not just about opening a book and studying and taking notes. There's a lot more distractions that hold you into that position. But, Um, J.D. Tant, Texas preacher, his story is kind of similar to what you're talking about. He spent a lot of time away traveling. And I believe there's an account where he missed, one of his children passed away and he wasn't at home. If I remember what's said about that. It's good to want to save the world, but you've got a responsibility at home that doesn't take second place. I mean, it's, yeah.
And from a practical standpoint, if you're you have to do your study. You're not going to be able to do your public work and private work. You're not going to be growing if you're not spending time in the book. But you need to spend time with people so that you have those opportunities to teach and encourage. A preacher who sits and studies all week is not going to be appreciated if he never spends any time with the congregation and sharing those words of encouragement, sharing those words of teaching, being involved in people's lives. It's just not, it just doesn't work.
And to that point, Paul, going back earlier in Ecclesiastes, what has God given us? To eat, drink, and be merry, for the days he has allotted us, for this comes from God. And if we as preachers aren't out there actually living life and enjoying the gifts God has given us, our preaching also is going to become very dry and static, because we're not going to have the practical experiences or illustrations or everything to kind of, okay, do you need that for a good sermon? Not necessarily. Does it connect better with the audience so they can see truth illustrated in real life situations? Absolutely. And to Paul's point, just being with the members, enjoying your brethren, because you're not separate from the congregation that you labor in. You are amongst them. You're underneath the same eldership. You're sharing their burdens. They're sharing your burdens, and vice versa. So be a part of them. Enjoy life. Enjoy the blessings that God has given us through in this life and through his people.
That's right. That's a good point.
I agree with that.
Yeah. And then lastly, and we have two comments from Mike I want to bring in, but let's go ahead and just remind ourselves again of the closing two verses of the book of Ecclesiastes. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matters. Paul read for this while ago. And this is a great conclusion to the very thoughts that Solomon shared. Fear God and keep his commandments. This is man's all. When everything is said and done, that's the conclusion of our life. Whether we've served the Lord 50 years or we served the Lord 1 year and then we die. You know, it's still at that point. Let me think. There was so Alex Ogden in his commentary on Revelation talks about the term overcome. And if I remember correctly, he makes a point that the term overcome, the way it's used, is not so much used in future tense. It's used about at that moment in service unto the Lord, if I remember what he said correctly. And the idea there is the victory we have in Christ to overcome. Let him who hears what the Lord Spirit says to the churches, he who overcomes and so forth. It is the moment, the victory right now, and then the next moment will be victory at that moment. Same way here. Okay. We must keep in the commandments of the Lord because God will bring everything into judgment, whether secret or public, private, or good or evil, what have you. Yeah. Okay, real quick, let me bring in then Michael's comments, switch back over. And then Michael said he had to step away from the study for a bit, but wanted to add one more thought. If all of us older ones would purposely mentor at least one younger, example, Paul and Timothy, imagine the growth of the Lord's church and its workers. That's good. That's a good point. He goes on to say, as for the making of books having no end, it is evident from your backgrounds that you all take that seriously. But the best fact is to use but one book as your spiritual guide. I rejoice in that fact. And that's fundamentally the basis for our lives as his children, following his book, his word. All right, gentlemen, we went over just a little bit, but we started a little bit late. It was Tom's fault, so we'll blame it on him today. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't. But this puts us at about an hour mark. Any thoughts or comments before we close this up?
You know, I just really think that the last two statements really need to be taken in the context of the whole book, that the book began as an experiment, try to find the meaning of life. by ignoring spiritual things and just concentrating on what's in front of us, the world around us, whether it's pleasure, wealth, power, all the different things we can have. Solomon has found that none of those things are successful. And one of the big points to each one of them is death. Death ultimately brings all of these things to vanity. It makes everything that we pursue vanity. It makes everything meaningless. Nothing has a satisfaction of its own. He doesn't really touch spiritual things until these concluding remarks. And really, these concluding remarks kind of began at the last chapter, where towards the end of the last chapter, he begins this conversation to a young person, so to speak, to say, putting God first now is the only thing that actually really makes sense. That's the wisest thing you can do. So as he comes to a conclusion here, he's hammering down this last point. I was reading some commentators who said that maybe some of the language about the well-driven nails and the goads, he's saying, look, real wise words are the kind of thing that provoke you to doing it. And I was wondering about the nails, but he says maybe it's the idea of nailing yourself to these ideas, and I thought, well, that's kind of interesting that, so you don't drift away from it, that you're anchoring yourself to these ideas. And the idea is this life isn't all that there is. And why that's important, sometimes you'll hear secular scholars try to make the case that Ecclesiastes is a book written without a view of the afterlife. And of course, that's completely the opposite. Ecclesiastes is written to say that if there is no afterlife, there is no meaning in life. That the concept of the afterlife, the vanity of life necessitates an afterlife. The vanity of life, for life to have meaning, it must be the case that there is a God. And therefore, the whole of our existence is surrounding the idea, why do we exist? It's to fear God and keep his commandments. This is what it's about. And the concept that we'll be accountable for this is a profound summation. It's kind of neat because in the Old Testament, you don't have a lot of judgment language. We don't see a lot of conversations about heaven and hell. In fact, you might make the case you don't see any conversations about heaven and hell. Like the idea of a resurrection is just very vague. The idea of, something after this. Here's the writer of Ecclesiastes dropping this point that's a New Testament principle. You're going to be held accountable for everything. Every work is going to be brought into judgment. Everything, even the secret things, are going to be brought up before God. Therefore, put God first. And I just think, again, the context of the book of Ecclesiastes, these last verses, particularly the last two verses, are truly, it's kind of a funny written experiment, if it's a thesis, because he just drops two verses in at the end to say, well, here's the solution. It's not this life that matters. It's the next one. Live that way.
Good explanation. Yeah. Appreciate that. Any other thoughts or comments? Okay. A lot more we could say on it, but I think it's a good time to pull it to a close. Appreciate your interest in this study, and I appreciate you guys studying through it with me. Let's see. So next week, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about 5 steps for growing a local church. We're going to look at 5 different ways religious leaders fail. I think that's a big one we need to try to really think about. And that's not just preachers. It could be elders as well, but more denominationally, you kind of think of religious leaders, some of the examples we could use. And we'll talk about 5 dangers facing our children today and other topical subjects. And then after several weeks of that, we'll figure out our next book study and slide back into that. And if you've got any questions or comments for us, be sure to let us know. You can drop them in the comment or the chat area in respect to these respective live streams, or drop them on our Facebook page, Truth Factor Live. We'll look at that. I think you can drop a comment there. I have to go back and look and see, maybe not. And email us. Send all your questions and comments to questions@truthfactorlive.com, and we'll definitely love to hear from you. Let's see. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our study today. Gentlemen, any final thoughts before we bring it to a close? All righty. We'll see everyone back here again next Thursday, 11 o'clock a.m. Central Standard Time, as we look at the question or the list of 5 tips for growing a local church, a local congregation. Definitely some important things we need to consider, things to be reminded of. All righty. We'll see everyone next week. Y'all have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.